plays, how beautifully she plays, and so you can have a full appreciation that she also has a deep understanding of the topic of Lebanese music in the United States. And she is an ethnomusicologist, I believe, and she has traveled a long distance by car to be with us. And I believe you've gone to Charleston
and Raleigh, North Carolina.
And Raleigh, North Carolina, so she has been on the road. And thank you so very much for including us in your tour throughout the South. So I'm going to turn this over to you at this point. Thank you.
This was my PhD research, my doctoral dissertation research, the music of Arab Americans. And so it's a topic that's very near and dear to me. However, my research has kind of turned a corner in the mid-90s, and I think I'm really more known for my work among Indonesians, among female reciters of the Quran. I have books on Islam in Indonesia, which is also very exciting because they're crazy about Arab music there, and they're beautiful singers and reciters there. And then I've also done work in the Arabian Gulf. But every time I come back to this topic, I realize how much I love it and how much more there is to do. And of course, I teach about it, and I stay in contact, I think, with the Arab American community because of the Middle Eastern music ensemble that I direct. And that's really a forum for exchange, working with guest artists. So we've probably hosted 50 or 60 guest artists over the past 20 years from, I mean, you name it, all the Arab and Middle Eastern traditions. So I feel like I'm a little bit on the sidelines of really being in the research, but there's so much more here to share with you, and so many more opportunities for collaboration. So I'm very excited to be here. So my work focused on the music of Arab Americans, and I brought a couple of things that I've done because it really did affect my career and my interests. If we could talk about a picture that is worth a million words. We are here on Atlantic Avenue in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. This is around 1948. This is Russell Bunai, Rasulullah Bunai. I believe he was born in Buenos Aires and spent most of his adult life in the Boston area. One of the great singers of the 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s probably. This is Amr Haddaj, and I'll talk a little bit more about Amr Haddaj. He immigrated from Jerusalem with his wife Sena Haddaj, and they're standing in front of Alam Phone Arabic records, and you see in Arabic, Alam Phone. Right up there's a sign. So this was one of the many Arab American recording companies. We always think about recording as, maybe the giants, his master's voice and Sony and so forth. But ethnic communities took the material culture as well as the economic equations sort of into their own hands, and they had their own recording companies. This is one of several Arab American labels, and when Dwight encourages you to cough up your photographs, I would say don't forget about your records that are at home, because they're so interesting. In the window of Alam Phone Records, we have this poster for a hafla, and pictured here is Musa Cohen. He was an Egyptian Muslim, people would point out to me, yes, and he's a great singer, and he's a Muslim man from Egypt. And of course, the great majority of Syrian and Lebanese performers were a variety of Christians, right? Just to say that working with the Arab American community, and is there a picture of the Arab American community on the cover of our book? No. But it really led me to a whole interest in how do we think about American music. It's not just Anglo-American masters and their African-American slaves and then servants and then entertainers, right? I mean, American music really is a patchwork. And I think yesterday when Akram was talking about white, what does white mean? And my students tossed this out. Well, you know, if you were Italian, if you were Irish, or if you were German, if you were Danish, those meant very different things, you know, in the early part of the 20th century. And so that really led me to think about music as American music, as a multicultural phenomenon, and something I really insist with my students and in terms of research and so forth. So if you're interested, I brought a copy of our book along, which was originally published in 1997, and then a second edition with 4 new chapters and revised resources, including a website with musical examples and videos and so forth, is available. But let's go back to from 2016 to 1987. This is at the home of Karim Bedr, who was actually from Iraq, the big man. One of the really important musicians in Arab Detroit. And this is kind of how I did my field work. I had just started to play the oud, and most people were not that interested that I was getting a PhD. That didn't really mean a whole lot to these families. But when I walked in carrying my oud, they would say, "Take it out. Let's see what you can do." And these kinds of scenarios just happen spontaneously all the time. They would call their kids, or they would call their friends. "Hey, this lady came over and she wants to know about Arabic music." You see there's someone here is playing the drum over here. And this is Ali Barada. He became quite a well-known singer in Detroit. And Karim Bedr has been honored with a National Heritage Fellowship. You know, playing the oud is something that has stayed with me, and also the qanun. Aisha is playing my qanun beautifully now, so that she didn't bring hers from home. But for me, performance is a methodology both for research and for teaching. So I have directed a Middle Eastern music ensemble since 1994. I don't even want to count how many years that is. But it's an incredible place, you know, for collaboration. You know, students who are, I get orchestra refugees, they're sick of playing in orchestra. I get students who are, you know, have wonderful musicianship, but they could never get into orchestra. I have people who are, you know, tapping into their own identity. Maybe they're, you know, they're Arab American themselves, or they're somehow interested or affiliated with the Middle East. And we really have an opportunity to teach and learn in ways that really kind of transcend the professor assigning articles and papers and just, you know, text, text, text. So I'd like to talk about five or six things, I guess. The hafla, the mahrajan, the recording industry and other technologies, the nightclub era, and sort of the difference between immigration in the 20s and the 60s, and then this kind of progression from immigrant to refugee. Maybe I'll make a comment on that, and just this theme of diaspora that has been so nicely laid out for us by last night's discussion and this morning's presentations. I think Matt did a nice, his presentation was a nice harbinger of this nightclub era. And earlier this morning, just thinking about immigration and the connection of the music world and the literature world. So the hafla, here we go. Here's the Syrian Lebanese community in 1949. That's quite a photograph. I mean, there are hundreds of people at this hafla at Hotel St. George, and there are the musicians. And that is quite a band here. And some of these musicians, I was fortunate enough, since when I was in my beautiful 20s doing field work, that was the late 80s. And so some of these folks were in their 80s when I was able to interview them, and they are here on stage, and I think I might have a close-up of this. But these events were held for philanthropic purposes, to raise money, to build a church, to send back home, and always featured a healthy group of musicians. One of the things that musicians pointed out to me was that in the beginning, the immigrants from greater Syria were samia. They were listening connoisseurs. They were not interested in the dance. And they would say, we used to put the tables right up to the stage. And if there was dancing, it happened over here, or in the break, or something like that. But it was about listening to the music. That was one of the things they pointed out as important to me. Here is one of the musicians that I interviewed, long gone now, but a really important oud player. The women said he was absolutely devastatingly handsome. They called him Tarzan. But he was part of a group of 3 who were dubbed by the Rabita al-Qalamiya people as al-Fursan al-Thalatha, the 3 Musketeers. And they traveled up and down the eastern seaboard. So Joe Bedway is featured on many, many recordings. I actually found him still playing in one of the Philly nightclubs when I went to visit in, I believe this is also in the summer of 1987, and then he invited me to his home. So you may see him in some of these pictures. Here's another picture of the, oh, I guess I have 2 in a row. Well, yes, and I know why. Of a farewell concert at the Hotel St. George, a little bit of a different one. So the gentleman that we saw in the record cover, on Atlantic Avenue, that's Russell Bunai. Here's Mohammed Al-Akkad. One of these is probably John Nazarian, and this is Amr Khadaj, his wife Sena Khadaj. And I think the drummer is Mike Hemway, I believe, the person playing Berek. Let's look at it a little bit closer. Again, just it's so interesting, right, to see what people wore. See these women smoking cigarettes. I mean, who smokes cigarettes anymore, right? Here is another close-up of some musicians over here on the side. And again, they, saying that absolutely the tables went right up to where the musicians were. This gentleman here, Naeem Karakan, an absolutely phenomenal violinist. Again, Jalil Azuz, Sena and Amr Khadaj. I think that's Jalil Azuz on the oud, Mike Hemway on the drums, and I'm not sure, but some of these might be Rabita people or their friends, because they would often MC the events or make announcements. Very important singer, Hanan. I interviewed her when she was, sort of à la retraite. She wasn't really performing anymore, but still living in Brooklyn. And let's see if I can make this work.
اسطوانات كليوباترا المطربة حنان.
So you might notice there's a little bit nashaz, a little bit out of tune there, right? So they're recording with 78 technology, which means you get one chance. You can't go back and overdub. Those records are rolling. Everybody is in the same room, and everybody is playing into the same microphone, right? So you find imperfections in these microphones that tell you so much about kind of the technology and the way people are kind of troubleshooting or not. But again, the hoot of the steamship is the name of this song, and standing on the shore, it's dangerous whether you stay and it's dangerous whether you go, right? Either way. The announcement at the beginning is the way that these records work. Istiwanat Cleopatra el Mutriba Hanan. So Cleopatra Records was another one of these Arab American labels. So here's Russell Bunai, again, the gentleman from the first picture. And when I interviewed him, he was well in his 80s, he and his wife Rose, and in their house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he really stressed this idea of the sami'ah, the listening, or the sami'un, the listening connoisseurs who really appreciated the poetry, who really appreciated the way people pronounced the words, and talked about his relationship with the Rabita al-Qalamiyya. So let's listen to him, let's listen to a little bit about qasida that was given to him by Nasiba Rida. And this, I don't know if it's going to play right away. Okay, so here he is. This is his tape recorder, and he's playing the recording for me. This is way before I made the CD, right? So he's playing it on his portable cassette recorder. This is my recorder recording him, and he's telling me about the song. But we're just going to listen to the song.
اسطوانات نجمة الشرق الأستاذ رزق الله البناني.
Don't look at that yet. Actually, here, I'll go back without playing. So many things you could say about that. First of all, the arrangement is very sophisticated, right? This isn't a bunch of folk musicians sitting on the back porch. These are musicians who have really worked at this arrangement with his non-metric solo delivery, and then the musicians come in perfectly in sync with what we would call a lazima, a filler, and then you also hear that there's a some touch of modernism with the chromaticism in there, yes, for him this was the music that was worthwhile, and it was being made at the moment. It wasn't just dredging up some old stuff, which they also did. They brought lots of things with them. But a new qasida by Nasiba Rida and newly composed music that I'm sure the musicians probably figured out together. And he did some funny songs. He's got a great song about playing the horses, La de Khair, on the CD that I did, where he says, it's about gambling, and I dreamed that I won, but then I woke up and I lost. So he wasn't all serious. So how do you discover a musical life that happened well before you were born, right? How do you figure that out? Well, people kept stuff. They kept concert programs and flyers and menus from restaurants. And this is one, so what can we learn from this poster? An annual hafla sponsored by St. Basil's Roman Catholic Church, Pawtucket and Central Falls, Rhode Island. The Blackstone Valley of Rhode Island was where these people from the northern part of Greater Syria were concentrated. And so people would say, that's where you have these Samia. Now, where do the Lebanese come in? They're all in the mix, right? When they come, and it's central, and it's called Greater Syria, right? Bilad Hashem. But then, as Warren David, who I think was wasn't he president of the ADC for a while? Very important person in Dearborn. He said, we woke up one morning and we were Lebanese, right? So they came as Syrians, but then learned, when they chopped up Syria, oh, I guess we're Lebanese now, right? But yeah, kind of the back and forth was that boundary between Syrian and Lebanese at this time was very, very fluid, right? So Central Falls, the Blackstone Valley area of Rhode Island, absolutely important, not only for the community, but for the way they patronized musicians, because they organized events, they organized haflis. So we've got Sunday afternoon, November 18th. Now, if you ever make a poster or a flyer, please put the year, because the people who are researching your life would like to know. And I learned that there is some fancy way that you can look in the calendar and figure out what Sundays are also November 18th and kind of try to guess it, right? Adults are $2, children are $1. So here's Philip Solomon, the great violinist, and he was dead by the time I started my research. But his wife, Virginia Solomon, who had organized many of these events, was fantastic. She became a great friend. I mean, these church ladies were so helpful to me. And they were also the ones that were behind all these events. They were the ones doing all the heavy lifting. So here's Muhammad Al-Akkad on Qanun, and John Nazarian, when I interviewed him, he was president of Rhode Island College. So these musicians also had other lives. Here is an example of a program. This is a tribute to Russell Bunai. Who is he praising? Expression of appreciation for the Damascus Fraternity and Community Committee of the Arabic Press, the radio. He's doing an anniversary concert. It's a great honor. Blah, blah, blah. And silver anniversary concert, distinguished tenor. And Sabri Andrea is the chairman, and here's your Damascus fraternity. And I would be surprised if others of you doing research on Arab Americans did not also come across some of these names. Vocalists, Miss Najiba Murad, Mr. Ahmed Khadaj, and Joseph Malouf, and then our instrumentalists, Philip Solomon, violin, Muhammad Akkad, Qanun, Joe Bedway, oud, Mike Hamway, drum, and many others. So you scour these documents for every piece of information you can. The other major event for musicians was the Mahrajan. Mahrajans were festivals. Sometimes they lasted for an afternoon, but they often lasted all weekend. And people would come, they were outdoors, there was picnics, people would hook up and find their partners for life. And they were much more kind of festive, lighthearted events, much more dance. So again, Sena and Ahmed Khadaj, this is Jalil Azuz and Naim Karakand. Notice the nice microphone that they're using. There's their sound system right there. And yeah, I guess maybe I'll say something about Sena and Ahmed Khadaj. He was shot in his store in Detroit. But I never met her, but I talked to her on the phone. And I had extensive conversations with their daughter, Laila Khadaj, who's a teacher and visual artist in Dearborn. They came from Jerusalem in 1947, and I have the letter, it's in some of my publications, that grants them permission to go on a 6-month tour to entertain I don't know if they use the word Arab, Syrian, Lebanese community, and well, so they were Palestinian, right? They lived in, I think, well, I don't know, they may have come from Lebanon before that, but anyway, they were working in Jerusalem at the radio station, at BBC, Al-Sharq al-Adnan, BBC radio in Jerusalem, and they were granted permission for a 6-month tour. Well, guess what? Israel turned into Israel while they were in the United States, and so they never went back. They ended up staying in the United States and making many recordings and touring, and that he had a store where I think he did a number of different kinds of businesses. But she has a voice that's also not to be missed. I don't think I have a recording here. So, in terms of dealing with primary documents, right, they're absolutely essential. Where are the patrons for these events? And again, the wife of Philip Solomon, Virginia Solomon, and her friend Georgina Decky and Blanche Decky. And interestingly, when I went to Syria, for the first and only time I went to Syria, who hooked me up was the Deckys. They hooked me up with all of their cousins in Aleppo. So we were wined and dined and taken out to music events till 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not exaggerating at all. And they worked through something called the Aleppian Aid Society. But you look at the organizing organizations here, right? Maronite Church, Melkite Church, Syrian Orthodox, and again, this is in the Blackstone Valley area of Rhode Island. Here's a poster. And then we have Sena Hadaj. Brooklyn Academy of Music. And now here, November 19th happens on a Wednesday. So I think the other poster had November 19th also, right? So again, please put your year on your posters, on your flyers. But interestingly, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is still one of the major venues, this is all in Arabic, right? And here we see the same, the same musicians playing the Intarakand and, oh, maybe it's up here. Let's have a listen to here. I stuck it up here. As well, because of course there are these bookends, namely the 1920s, the mid-20s, and the mid-60s. In the mid-20s you have immigration quotas that Dr. Akram talked about last night, limiting the flow of immigrants to just a trickle. And those floodgates do not open until the 1960s. So people have children, and their children have children, and people are more and more distanced from that immigrant experience. And of course, that word assimilation, right, comes to the fore. People are living in the United States, they're not asleep. And so here, this is called a night of ecstasy. So the word ecstasy, tarab, right? It's interesting the way I don't think Americans would call their event ecstasy, right? That's like a little too racy for us, right? My Danish relatives would not talk about ecstasy. They just wouldn't do it. So it's certainly a translation of the term tarab, which means, you know, rapture or ecstasy or just the incredible power that music has. Featuring the most in modern Arabic singing, Sena and Amr Haddaj. We know they're recording radio and stage stars from the Middle East, and we've got music by all these other people, and it's going to go from 5 o'clock till question mark, and there's going to be dancing. Look at the bottom of the poster. I don't know if you can see it. Dancing, debki, twisting, and many other kinds of entertainment in Irwin, Pennsylvania. So we see things becoming a little bit more modern, and soon we're going to be in color too. Putting my presentation on this computer has messed with the fonts a little bit, but yeah, Danny Thomas, right? One of the most famous Lebanese entertainers. And on the record that I did, I have him doing Arabic folk songs. And so it's Ataba and Mijana and Dal'ona and all this stuff. And it's published by St. Jude's, the children's hospital. And I must say, I was absolutely terrified to get the right, to actually write them the letter to say, could I use this? And of course, when I wrote the letter, they said, of course you could use this. I did see Danny Thomas perform once, do his Lebanese thing in Dearborn in the late, I don't know, sometime in the 90s, I think. Yeah, again, so Sena and Ahmed, actually this is not Sena, I think she was a recording, I have to look at my notes to remember who she was, but Danny Thomas, mostly known for his role as an American on television, and of course his incredible philanthropic vision with the St. Jude's Hospital for Children. Just a photograph from somebody's archive. So we have the support of the church, right? All of this entertainment is completely happening with the congregations of the church, but also with the priests in charge. Okay, we're going to move into living color. Anton Abdulahad, known as Tony Abdulahad, learned to speak Arabic in the United States. He was born in the United States and one of the most popular singers, and very nice to have had contact with his children as well following his passing. He really kind of bridged both worlds because he had a foot in 78 RPM recording. He told me, he said, you know, my uncles used to have these records and they cost like $8 a piece. And only one of them had the machine to play it on. But, you know, everybody would come over to the house and listen to these records. And he said, and as a little kid, I would be the one turning it over again, getting the other record, you know. But as we'll see in a moment, he made LP albums as well. So this is his very famous, wonderful recording of Mizerlu, which, you know, everybody says, you know, the Armenians say it's Armenian, the Turks say it's Turk, the Greeks say it's Greek. I say it belongs to Tony Abdulahad and Phil Solomon. For this, you'll notice in this recording, let's hope it works, claves, piano, and a great violin part. So let's...
Ah
So yes, this is an LP album, and we see Matt's presentation coming to haunt us with this fantasy. It's the Middle East fantasy. Look, here's the Nile. Here are the pyramids. Here are some palm trees. We do not have these things in Massachusetts. No, no, no. This was not something that Tony Abdullah grew up with. So it gets wilder and wilder, and I'm only including the R-rated covers because there are also X-rated covers. Here is Mohammed Bakar and his Oriental Ensemble flying on their flying carpet with his I Dream of Genie girls, his Finjan, and his the Magic Carpet, Music of the Middle East, Volume 4, so we know there are at least 3 volumes before that. And this interesting cityscape we have down here. So Mohammed Bakar, here we have a few others. Hopefully they're somewhat blurry. Eddie Kochek, I'll talk about him in a minute. Eddie the Sheikh Kochek. And Haki Obadia, a Jewish musician from Iraq, totally made the belly dance scene work in the New York area. This is on the Decca label. Eddie the Sheikh Kochek, and they did Amaraba, Arabic music for the American ear. Amaraba was their brand, and they did 13 albums called Strictly Belly Dancing. And I tell you, the music is really, really interesting and really great. And this was the whole nightclub era. Now this cover was prefaced by Matt's presentation. I think this orchestra, we can forget about it. Sonny Lester and his orchestra and chorus. Little Egypt presents How to Belly Dance for Your Husband. So here's the husband. She's belly dancing for him. So, you know, belly dancing in the 60s and 70s, it was offered at the YMCA. I mean, it was just seen as this incredibly liberating way for, you know, I wasn't a belly dancer except, you know, at a party, but, you know, for people who probably, you know, grew up German or Danish, you know, all of a sudden you could do this. I mean, it was very exciting. And of course, this was greeted with absolute horror by the people at the Columbian Exposition in 1893 in Chicago. They couldn't believe, and you know, that this woman was moving that part of her body. That, you know, you just don't go to that part of your body. The dancer at the Columbian Exposition in 1893 was called Little Egypt, and whether these performers from Egypt actually escaped and fled, or whether this persona of Little Egypt just proliferated, all of a sudden there were Little Egypt dancers named Little Egypts on the vaudeville circuit, on the you know, on all these kind of entertainments. You know, you would not, and then, you know, in St. Louis presenting Little Egypt, and then in, you know, Utica, New York presenting Little Egypt. So here we have you get a booklet, you get a bonus instruction booklet on how to belly dance for your husband. I mean, that is an album cover. And here's Eddie the Sheikh Kochek, and geared to the Amaraba, geared to the American ear, and his strictly belly dancing. And you know, I think we can think about this kind of self-auto-orientalizing, like, you know, capitalizing on all these kind of crude and sometimes embarrassing caricatures. I think all immigrant groups did that, and maybe sometimes still do that, kind of get that low-hanging fruit of what do people associate with our culture, or what's gonna, you know, what's gonna sell our shtick, because you see it in lots of different communities. Okay, I like this one too. Belly dance Mecca East. Housewives, secretaries, students, professional dancers, instructors. Belly dance your way to health. This was a healthy thing to do. It was really, you know, people did it for exercise and because it just felt great. And part of this nightclub scene, oh, what happened there? No, don't do that. Electric keyboard, amplification. This is Freddie Elias, the great Lebanese violinist of New England, just passed away a couple years ago, played well into his 90s. And I just want you to listen to the Chickatelli section with the what at first sounds very cheesy and kind of commercial, all of a sudden you have this just beautiful oud scene. So while we might, think all kinds of things about the nightclub era, there was some really exciting music happening and some great collaborations between Arab musicians, but also Greek and Turkish and Armenian and Jewish. It was a real meeting place. And again, this was before the 1960s, when we had the renewed arrival of Arab immigrants from Syria, from Lebanon, from Iraq, from everywhere. Okay. So I was asked by Smithsonian to put together a compilation of George Abdo and his Flames of Araby Orchestra. So I curated from about a dozen of his records what I thought was absolute Abdo, what you have to have. This is available on the Smithsonian label, and it's some really interesting stuff. So I'll just get slightly academic for a moment. I think what musicians provide is this idea of effective labor. And that's not, I don't want to quote her so much. Let's not worry about her quote. But the idea that musicians provide their audiences the opportunity through their work to kind of feel community, to experience language, to hear the sounds of their worlds. And when I went to Detroit, okay, so now we're thinking of more of a modern, modern working musicians, not the old timers. These musicians, they're artists, but it's also an industry, right? Every wedding has to have at least a band, if not two bands or three bands. And sometimes weddings have multiple events, right? So here's Rena and Naim, and they're doing a Zepha, and Zepha is the big procession. And I think in the interest of time, I won't show this, but they're getting ready to, here's Naim, and here's Rena, and they're Druze from Lebanon. And they're getting ready to bring the bride into the party. Interestingly, the wedding is a Yemeni wedding, so they're all men on one side and all families on the other. But the staple of Dearborn is Lebanese music and musicians. Another very important musician, Nadim Delaykan, playing mizmar. So again, here's my sort of take on this idea of effective labor. As ritual specialists, again, I consider these musicians ritual specialists. Musicians bring to the gathering the sounds and feelings of community, of homeland, modeling perhaps an ideal, if temporary, ethnic world. They create collective feeling and suggest or facilitate the discovery or activation of individual and community identities. This is great. The kid is picking up the money off the ground, right? They've gotten tips. And here's Nadim playing his mizmar. Here's at the Arab World Festival. And yes, so again, with this later wave of immigrants from the 1960s, many more people from villages, many more folk people who love to dance, who love to debka. And the weddings that I went to, if you weren't up dancing, it meant that you were infirm and 98 years old, or you were in diapers, right? But everybody dances. And to me, that just turned me on to this scene so incredibly. Here's Rana, and I would like to show you do I have time to just show you a little clip from their home? Yeah? Good? Okay, how are we doing? Oh yeah, I'm gonna show you a little clip from their home. So I said, Rana and Naim, I want to show my students how this works. Can you just perform Ala Delona for me? So let's see if this works. What do I do? What did I do? This is me. over here. And it was that whole summer that I did field work. Everybody was watching the World Cup. And it's pretty cute. Her daughter comes home. Here comes the daughter. And she's like, what's going on? And then she puts her backpack down and she comes back in and starts dancing. All right, we'll move on. So if you were in a class with me, I would actually walk you through some of the issues that the Arab American community taught me to think about music and community in any situation. And there are these kind of unifying themes of any immigrant experience: the role of individual musicians, the role of cultural institutions, the intersections between music and community and identity, the way that sometimes a music will die or skip a generation only to be revived by some interesting person. And the role of universities, and the role of even people like me and my Middle Eastern music ensemble. Why would I be in the position to sort of, open the door to this wonderful, rich world of culture and identity? I mean, if I had $5 for every student that started taking Arabic because of being in my ensemble first, I'd probably be $25 richer. No, I'd probably be much richer than that, actually, because it is really interesting, very interesting the way that works. And I like this idea that effective labor is immaterial, but it's a kind of biopower, right? And here's an example of here's my biopower. There it is, right there. And those are my lovely friends, now gone, Rose and Russell Benai. So I hope you've learned a little bit about that. And get in touch with me if you have any ideas or old programs or records or whatever. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Now it's time for Q&A, for a few minutes of Q&A. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
In a very simple way, and maybe there is no difference, but I think there is, between Arabic music and American music, the musicology of it, the theory of it.
Okay, I'll give you like an elevator, a paragraph. First of all, most American music that we grow up with has harmonies, right? So you usually have one melody and then chords that go underneath it, right? So if you've ever been in choir, you've got soprano, alto, tenor, bass, or if you know how to play song on a guitar, right? You're saying, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, right? But you've got your chords underneath it, right? So Arab music doesn't use harmony, but it's just one melody. So at the surface, it seems like, well, that's simple, right? That's simpler. But the melody can be much more complex, as you saw with Aisha's singing, because the system of scales has microtones. So you can't play this. You can only play some of this music on the piano, but you can't play all of it because there are notes that fall in the crack. And also, scales. When you're playing the music, you do all these different kinds of ornaments and details and special nuances that audiences will react to. And you can throw in accidental notes, or you can go from one scale to another scale. So that's cool. And then when 4 or 5 people are doing that, they're kind of doing it in sync, but a little bit out of sync, so you get this kind of very messy texture, which some musicologists would think, oh my God, that's awful. But other people think it's wonderful. And then, for example, the example I played of Freddie Elias with the beautiful oud tuck scene, you've got a rhythmic background and then a free solo, a free moving solo on top of it.
That's sort of new, right? And what he did in that little thing with the musicality, it sounded more American to me.
Well, it sounded American because they were using keyboard, electric keyboard, and because there was probably a guitar there. But the very traditional part of it was this beautiful, very traditional oud tuck scene that came in. So you've got metric music and non-metric music at the same time. Then you heard Habib's percussion solo, right? I mean, the drumming is just phenomenal, right? So that, it makes you want to move, that kind of drumming. So you can see why the music was popular. I mean, this woman, I interviewed a nightclub owner, and she said, you know, our nightclub, she said, you would have to make reservations weeks in advance. She said, senators came in, John Kennedy came in. I mean, these were sophisticated, very hip places to go, some of them. I don't know if that's your experience, Matt, in the kind of, but this was before my time. Like I hung out at the Averoff in Cambridge a lot, that was still happening. But many of these places were already, you know, by the end of the kind of 60s, but a natural outgrowth of kind of the coffee shop culture. So it had real appeal. Yeah.
That Abdel Ahad piece you played, there's this thing I think is called like Hollywood Hijaz or something.
Mm.
It's the name of a maqam, but I think it's become like a orientalized kind of Hijaz, right? I mean, music.
Yeah, Hollywood Hijaz usually refers, if you play it on the piano, right? If you play Hijaz, I don't know how to pull it out. Up.
Oh, so it doesn't have any microtones.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So if you play. You kind of flatten out these two notes. I mean, that's what people call Hollywood Hijaz, because when keyboards came in. But if I was playing it on the oud, I would probably make this note a little higher and this note a little lower, right? So that's what they're doing. But yeah, it's like immediately Oriental, right?
That became like a genre of Hollywood music almost, right? I mean,
Well, I think so with these kind of films and so forth. Yeah, definitely. And there are some really interesting cues in films to make things sound Oriental, and this is absolutely one of them. You know, you do that, if somebody walks in the door and you hear that noise, oh, he must be a bad guy, right? Right? He's probably like dark and has a mustache and, right? That Hoochie Coochie song, yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? I see our moderator here. Although we do have one less person this afternoon, right?
Yes, please.
Cool. Yes.
I'm the last person.
Oh, you're the last person. Okay, good.
So how did you get into this? Are you having
Well, let me ask. I think I can say that, but did you have a question?
I did.
Please.
So I played you that little clip of the crooner, Uncle K, and everybody has mentioned to me one album called Port Said.
I didn't show you Port Said because that has, in my mind, it said the cover is pretty X-rated. But Port Said, yes, it is. I mean, yeah.
So it was one of the most. Was it one of the ones that was produced by one of the Americans?
Yeah, it was by Mohammed Bakar, and you can look it up online. You can find the whole thing online. I mean, it's not that bad. It's got a woman on the front and she's got pasties on it. You have it, right? Yeah. So it's amazing what went down, right? I mean, the FCA, right, or what are they called? The big censors, right? You couldn't get away with that today anywhere, right? Yeah, the FCC, right? But yeah, that was considered just some really, really hot music, and everybody had that album. Everybody did.
And have you heard of something else called something like Hala Isi Ala or something? Hala Isi Ala? Does that sound familiar? Everybody kept talking about this one song that Uncle K used to always sing. Does that sound familiar?
Which one?
Something
Yellow.
like Hala Isi Ala. I don't know. Like I speak Arabic and I don't know this. I know the word Allah is in it, but I don't.
Well, interesting. Yeah, and those records, like for example, Eddie the Sheik Kochek, you know, the Mickey Mouse thing, that kind of auto-orientalizing. He has a song called 1,000 Years Ago, and Ali Baba had a wife, ready, willing, and able, till one day he heard her snore, now she's in the stable, way back in Egyptian land, they had no television. All they had were mummies who stood in one position 1,000 years ago. I mean, so, you know, it is a world, right? It is, but also what happened was people like my advisor and like Simone Shaheen, came over in the 1970s and 80s and said, what is going on? And there's been this whole new wave of much more, I mean, why do you think I could play with Aisha? It's only because, you know, my teachers and the musicians that I was with really affected this whole renaissance of classical music, of music minatorat, of all the old forms and the muwashahat, and there's some very serious places in addition to universities, but also summer retreats where you can study this music, and many, many people, you know, who are not Arab and who are related somehow, or who are really interested in learning, you know, the traditional maqamat and the forms and so forth. So that, you know, again, was affected by this weird immigration thing where nobody came. So 1, 2, 3 generations are that much farther away and that much kind of more mixed up, and then you've got kind of this crazy nightclub culture of decadence happening in our country, and yeah, so yeah, it's interesting stuff. But Port Said, look it up online. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Were there any other questions?
I just have a very quick one. I think the oud is the same as the lute, right?
Well, the oud is really the model for the lute. So the European lute is derived from the oud. Yeah, even the word.
Yeah, and did the Arabic, the structure of the music, which is so different from Western music, so the instrument went to Europe, or the basis of an instrument used in Europe, but did it have any effect on? It was more of a medieval instrument, wasn't it?
Well, so I mean, I would, you know, the way I teach is that, you know, the Arabs were in the Iberian Peninsula for 700 years, right? And they brought their instruments, their poetry, their singing traditions, and after the Inquisition, when, you know, the Muslims and Jews were kicked out, I mean, those things stayed there. There was already, you know, they had this convivencia, right? This mixing of populations. So many of our instruments actually are, many European instruments are modeled after Arab instruments. Not only the oud, al-oud, which becomes le lute, or lauta in Spanish, but also the sham, the oboe. Our oboe is also from the Middle East. The rebek, the bowed fiddle. Eventually you put it up under your chin, becomes, you know, a violin. So we have a lot more. The problem is that if you take a class in Western history, you know, the history of Western European art music, it'll say, and there was some Oriental influence. And that'll be it, you know, that will be the whole thing. So there really needs to be much, and many people are interested in these histories, and also in reinterpreting early music with the performance practices of, you know, Middle Eastern or sometimes Balkan music or something like that. So it's a great question.
You had one more question?
I did have another question about, you mentioned the maharagan, or the maharajans, and described it as this, you know, and we saw in some of the programs that there were Maronites and Orthodox and Melkites, or everybody together, versus I think some of the other events that were pretty, like, perhaps, you know, limited to one of those groups. And I wondered if that was something that was maybe special about the music events, that they were places where the various communities within the Lebanese and Syrian diaspora in the United States, where they sort of intermingle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a great theory. Because I think music can do that, and also if you're going to go to the trouble of having a big, you know, festival and with musicians and food, and you want to charge a few dollars, you know, it's in your interest to invite everybody who might be interested. But then I'm sure there are more, you know, more private events for, you know, smaller family rituals and holidays and things like that. But I think generally, you know, my field work is mostly in New England and then in Detroit, and then I did graduate school at UCLA, so I was kind of aware of the California scene. But I think there was a lot of blending back and forth between the churches and Syrian, Lebanese, whatever. I think it's only post-1965 that when you get all these more immigrants coming in, all of a sudden people are drawing lines again, saying, well, wait a minute, you know, that's not us. We're these kinds of people. So, yeah.
Everyone, please join me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.